Luckily, I don't have to fight the wind again. So we're here in very close proximity of each other, and for warm relations building, and to leave here later today as a happy family, because at the end this is the family meeting. At first I would like to specifically welcome Professor Peter Liefens. Professor Liefens is the Vice President at the KU Leuven in Belgium, the Vice President for Internationalization at Leru. Professor Liefens, thank you very much for being here. And then also a special welcome to Professor Junli Tan, the Vice President from Xiamen University. They flew in during the wind yesterday and they then escaped to a small Chinese restaurant to hide from the wind, where we had to sit outside. But just one thing more, yesterday evening I tried to assist you so that your salad didn't sort of go into the wind, but I only managed 7,000 steps, so I didn't make it to my 10,000, so bad of you, you didn't help me to keep to my 10,000. And then also a special welcome to two people who were part of our 25 years journey, and that is Samantha Walbrug-Parsat. Samantha, she is now the head of the International Relations Office at the Business School. So Samantha was also with us in the office and walked a long way with us as a student assistant first, and then as a staff member. And then also at the back, Alison April. Alison, please stand up. Alison worked in the office how long? 4 years in the late 90s, and then she, before that she met a French exchange student at and now she's living in Brussels. And she's just started this year as the university's representative for the Benelux countries. She will be responsible for assisting us with links in Belgium, Luxembourg and the Netherlands. And she's appointed through our development and alumni office, and will be responsible for alumni relations, but also to assist us with the European Union. Elif, be warned, Alison lives very close to the building, and if she stands on a roof she can look into your office window. So she will make sure that you keep doing your work. Anybody else who still feels excluded after the windy evening? Good. So today we have a more sort of quiet environment, and it's time to think and to share. So the program for today is to stimulate you about scholarship in Africa, higher education issues in Africa, and then we will talk about internationalization at Stellenbosch University, and then also hear from Leuven how they see internationalization and what projects and what plans they have, as it's also a new management at the KU Leuven. So that will give a good overview of the day. I'm going to quickly just do some slides to give the context again of the Stellenbosch University International, and that will give us just to have to situate it quickly. I won't take too much time from Professor Tefera. So 25 years, that's why you are here, that's why so many of you came, that's why this room is quite full. Just a recap of the office. I've shared this already with the SUPIA people yesterday morning. So the 5 centers, with the Center for Collaboration in Africa, Center for Partnerships and Internationalization, the Africa Center for Scholarship, the Global Education Center for the Mobility, and then the Services Center. So that is the basic organization. These are the 5 purposes. So I'm not going to sing, I'm not Elton John. It's only on the photo that there's a look-alike.
I guess one of these days he will start singing.
You have to.
So it's the internationalization policy is responsible in our responsibility. We have to work that out this year. Alliances, partnerships, global engagement, and it's much more than mobility. It's not about giving students an air ticket to go, it's about giving students also on campus a global experience and a global dimension towards their study and their experience on campus. And then the services platform, which is very important, and then also the development of scholarship in Africa, especially through the African Doctoral Academy, but Professor Howie will refer to that also later this morning. But then important, we're rooted in Africa. We are an African university and we want to make a difference in our community, in our country, and then on the continent. That's very important that comes through in all our activities. That's why we will always have a dedicated Center for Collaboration in Africa to focus on that and to make sure that that dimension is always present in our activities. But then also global in the reach, because we also want the others to be here. On Friday evening you will see something of this. I told the Supia people yesterday that what we do, we cannot do without being part of this web on campus. You cannot do everything, you're not allowed to duplicate, but you need to add that international dimension, and that's very important that, in our work, that we link up well to all the other offices at the university. Because we're not a little university in ourselves. That's a very important approach for us. On Friday evening, we've invited, every 5 years we do this, we ask the colleagues in the office to invite the people throughout the university with whom they've worked a lot during the 2-3 years, and then people from the finance office, the carpool, people from academic departments, they all are invited, and there will be about 400 people joining us for the festivities on Friday evening. That's because of this. Because everyone in Stellenbosch University International knows that you have to work with the other sections in the university. It's not easy, there's a lot of challenges, but you keep on pushing and you see what can come about. Just quickly, also for all, currently we have about 4,300 non-South African registrations, 13.4% of the total number, 58% from Africa, and then the most of our international students are postgraduate students. And of all the postgraduate students at the university, that's after the bachelor's, close to 20% are from elsewhere in the world. So which I think reflects well on the knowledge that people have about the status of postgraduate studies at the university. And one point of growth, or number of undergraduate students, very small, only 4% of the total number, and I think it still has to do with the notion that Stellenbosch is an Afrikaans university, which has changed quite dramatically over the past 4 or 5 years. And the first ones to discover that were the Zimbabweans, because our number of Zimbabwean students in the past 2 years just more than doubled, because they realized you can do 93.78% of everything you can do in English. The countries from where they are, es gibt ein deutsches Insel hier. Many of Namibia, Zimbabwe, you can see quite a big group, and that's the outside of Africa. A wide variety. There's about 100 nationalities all represented on campus. And don't read the small print. Incoming students last year for semester 790. For tailor-made programs, our winter school, summer school, and some short-term programs for American institutions, 195 students, and then so basically close to 1,000 last year. Outgoing, 95 for semester programs, 214 for summer schools, and then outgoing in total 309. So that means that 1,000 coming in, 300 going out. So there's quite a big imbalance. So we have to make plans for that. And 2 minutes. Factors facilitating internationalization at Stellenbosch is we now have for the first time internationalization as one of the 7 priority areas, strategic areas of the university. So that's very, very significant. It happened in 2016. And also we're looking forward still. We hope that it would come out in March, the National Policy on Internationalization of Higher Education. We have the explicit support of the University Executive Management Team. We have a position now, Vice Rector for Strategy and Internationalization. You've met her yesterday evening and she will join us this morning. We've got a strong profile on Africa and beyond. There's a dedicated unit. It's an attractive environment, and you've seen the view from here. But this is not part of the campus. And then we also have significant international networks with active relations that we have. Factors hindering us is a lack of a shared understanding of internationalization at the university. But tomorrow, we instituted the Institutional Advice Committee on Internationalization only last year in October, and it's our 3rd meeting tomorrow morning, and there we hope to accept a concept note on internationalization of higher education. What does it mean, and how can it help us then to develop our strategy later this year? If it's accepted tomorrow, it will be consulted widely at the university through the departmental chairs, executive heads, and also the heads of the support units. And then it will lay the basis for our strategy development later this year. Lack of funding. There's no national funding body for international mobility for students. In the South African context, international mobility is a luxury. There are other imperatives and other more important strategic issues to be addressed on South African campuses. So international mobility for students is sort of not on the list of priorities. If it's somewhere, it's a little bit low down. And from institutions, and also because of the situation on campuses and the financial framework of higher education in South Africa. Also for internationalization, I'm not sure how the implementation process will roll out, because there are so many national imperatives for higher education, and how the student body, how the staff will take to the a policy document and the implementation of that. First of all, staff are overworked, a lot of teaching, a lot of research, and the number of staff is not growing significantly, and now internationalization, and our task will be to convince them that internationalization is not an add-on, but it's a dimension they can use within the work they are doing and see it in that way, and hopefully then trick them into supporting us very strongly. And then curriculum requirements. After 25 years of doing internationalization, there are many people who still say, we at Stellenbosch, we know how to teach mathematics. Nowhere else in the world you do mathematics like we do it. Yes, it's true, but there's also mathematics, and I'm just using that as an example. Professor Revitsky is a very good supporter of us from the department. So that's things that we need to work on constantly. But we get surprises, like earth science has surprised us with a lot of students suddenly going overseas, because the coordinator of the undergraduate program, she's an international academic. She came to South Africa, and she sees the value, and she's helping us for earth sciences, for example. Something that we hope that will also change is that in 2016 we had our first intake of the BCom International Business. Through Hiba's intervention and through the intervention of the Faculty of Economic and Management Sciences, the normal 3-year BCom program was changed into a 4-year program with the 6th semester as a compulsory semester overseas. It attracted a wide range of applicants. And students, some students are struggling with now doing a BCom degree in 4 years instead of the usual 3, so some of them have dropped out. But anyway, this next semester, the first cohort will go overseas to all different universities. So that will also increase the outgoing mobility, and we're working on the same thing in engineering. Good, so welcome. This is for the others than Supia. Just a broad overview, and within this context, the program for the day will then proceed. Okay, I ask Nico Elema to just do the next part.
Thank you very much, Robert. Yes, welcome everybody. As I was introduced yesterday, before the week blew us all away, my name is Nico Elema. I manage the Center for Collaboration in Africa. It's one of the 5+1, if we can include the Confucius Institute as well, one of the centers within the SU International. So if you think of, if the word Africa comes up, that's when we lift our heads and we do our work. So we look after all the African bilateral partners, all the African networks within the university. We try to coordinate, and I always say that we try to create an enabling environment for our academics, for our staff, for our students, with our African partners. So there's also been a few references to Supia and Sian. So today we're actually running 2 programs in parallel, Sian and then the Supia. And at the moment it's quite a few partners from the African continent that is taking place. But we've changed the name a little bit. So Supia stands for Stellenbosch University Program for International Administrators. So I can see in future that we're going to open it up a little bit more to our partners and colleagues from beyond Africa as well to participate in the program. So we're busy the whole week. Throughout the week we filter into the Supia program, and because we cover topics like partnerships, we discuss partnerships, finance and admin of international offices, the impact of the mobilities and the programs that we're busy with, how do we monitor them, credit mobility, how to establish an international office. So you can see there's quite a range of the topics being discussed, and it's throughout the week. So today it's my task just to facilitate the first section, and Hiba will be the program director for the rest of the day. So first of all, we've got Professor Damtu, I must pronounce your name, you helped me correct, Damtu Tefera, and it's my privilege to introduce him today. He is our keynote speaker, and if you can just bear with me for half a second, I've asked him for a short bio as well, and then I have to condense it because it's quite impressive. Damtu is a professor of higher education and has been a leader of higher education training and development at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa since 2012. He's been a founder and director of the International Network for Higher Education in Africa, and which is also based at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. And he's also been the former director for Africa and the Middle East of the Ford Foundation and International Fellowships Program in New York. If you just look at his, the foundations or the centers that he's established, he's the former founding editor-in-chief of the Journal for African Higher Education and quite a few journals. I'm not going to mention them all. But he's also the lead and sole editor of the award-winning book African Higher Education, an International Reference Handbook, which was published in 2003, and Funding Higher Education in Sub-Saharan Africa, which was published in 2013. I think he's a very knowledgeable person to have today as our keynote speaker. He's also recognized as one of Africa's preeminent higher education scholars by the African Union Commission. So Damtu, thank you very much for making time. He's going to have about 35, 40 odd minutes, and then there's also been an opportunity for some questions and answers. So thank you very much, Damtu.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's nice to be here. First of all, I would like to thank the University of Stellenbosch, but I think you call it Stellenbosch University, so I'll stick to that, for inviting me to participate in this exercise, special event, and particularly single out Nico for assisting on my participation. Nico and I were in Ethiopia some weeks ago, is that right? And he insisted that I be part of this exercise. Thank you for insisting on that. In speaking on this topic of sustainability of internationalization, I thought of kicking off my speech by somehow intimating a story from the home front here at Stellenbosch. It was some years back. I was here. I don't know. I don't want to mention the years for a reason. With Professor Philip Altman. Many of you, probably all of you who are in international higher education would probably know him. He is a godfather of internationalization. He happens to be my mentor and the leading authority on internationalization, to attend a major conference here in South Africa. As luck had it, you might even call it by coincidence, we got invited to lunch by two members of the Stellenbosch University executives. I'm not going to mention names. I'm not going to mention the years deliberately, so that you can actually enjoy the story instead of who is this guy or who is she or who's he. To which we promptly agreed, though we actually didn't know what the agenda was. In the course of the luncheon, we discussed a number of issues, and the conversation went rather well. Then came the question of languages. And this was a time when the issue of language of instruction, in particular Afrikaans, was on a high pitch in the country. And the university was under heavy pressure to reconsider its position. But we only realized it later. It's in the middle of this warm conversation that the fate of the Afrikaans as the medium of instruction popped up, without absolutely no hesitation. It was Phil and I, unbeknown to us what was going on the ground, stated the fate of Afrikaans and the future of the new South Africa, providing some relevant cases from other countries. in international and comparative perspectives, where the language of instruction is different from the language of the larger populace. If my recollection is right, the discomfort of our hosts were unmistakably visible on their faces and their gestures. We simply put it to them, if the university is to be part of, let alone compete globally, and more so, be meaningful nationally, the use of an international language, for instance English, we didn't say which one, is simply critical. This, however, does not mean, we stated very clearly, that you could not use or develop your own language, in this case Afrikaans, in a higher education context. Okay, I'm not going further to what followed, but I must say that our hosts were very honorable enough to pay our bills. So here is a brief historical account to the journey in internationalization dimension in the context of the University of Stellenbosch, as I engaged with it. So that is historical context. So I'm heading now into the theoretical context of my presentation. Okay, you may problem is I don't know how much you have actually dealt with some of these items in the last several days, but regardless, I will probably simply carry on. Nico, please advise me if you have already covered some of these grounds. I will just let go, and then we'll have enough time for a conversation. All right. So I think let me take this thing out. As I said, Altba. Oops. Which one is the light? The red button would be the light. Okay, good. So the godfather of internationalization, he actually articulates internationalization as policies. The specific policies, programs undertaken by several stakeholders, the governments, academic systems, institutions, even individual departments, to deal with globalization. Another young, he, I think is a he, is as a process, not necessarily a policy, but as a process by which the teaching, the research, and other functions of the institution become internationally and cross-culturally compatible. Another describes it as a process from a national higher education institution, it's a very interesting one, to an international higher education institution, leading to the inclusion of international dimension in all aspects of holistic management, right? Altba, remember this one? This was in 2006, right? The next one is actually Altba in his further rethinking with his colleagues, in fact both of them his students, is now a strategy for societies and institutions to respond to the many demands placed upon them by globalization, and as a way for higher education to prepare individuals for engagement in a globalized world. Another very prominent thinker around this issue considers this not even a strategy or a process, it's actually a means to reach core goals of an institution rather than an end in itself. Right. Before I covered the so-called theoretical perspective, let me just bring some of the perspectives or the manifestations of internationalization beyond these general definitions which I try to lay out. So, when students travel abroad, that is one of the manifestations. I think earlier on we heard, I think you've done remarkably well in terms of your historical trajectory. In fact, one thing which I actually forgot to mention, subsequent to that conversation several years ago, I can actually say that this institution has moved done very well in terms of its international journey, in terms of its partnership with many African countries. So for me, it was actually a very interesting development in terms of where this institution was. I would really like to use many, but I would say several years ago. So that's one of the manifestations. The other manifestation is, which we know, it's a collaborative research, a university science memorandum of understanding, a branch satellite campus of franchise private providers, on the curriculum. I think you also spoke around this issue, one of the challenges you have, not necessarily, by the way, a problem here in Stellenbosch. Actually, a postdoc and I just published a work, and this country is going through what is called decolonization, right? So we looked at what do people really understand by decolonization. So actually, what we found out was there are half a dozen, at least so far as our research indicates, the understanding of what decolonization is. And what is interesting here is that there is now a tension between what is called internationalization and decolonization. But as I probably indicate later in my presentation, whether this should not coexist in a particular institution. Right. So what happens when, I think this is an interesting one, an institution or a country reevaluates the medium of instruction delivery. In this case, for example, not necessarily South Africa. I can also go into some countries in North Africa where the debate is going on whether they should be using English or French as a medium of instruction or Arabic. So it all depends on the governments which sit on that day. It's another politics there too, but this is also one of the issues, and this manifested within the context of internationalization. Common frame of reference, harmonizing credentials, and all that. This is happening very. I mean, I think you have also dealt with some of these issues. I'm not going to go into that. Attract and recruit foreign faculty to their campuses. I think I haven't seen that slide in the earlier presentation. I would have loved to see the kind of your faculty composition in terms of foreign academics. I think if my memory still serves me well, I think you, as a South African, have shown some growth in terms of your international faculty. It's, I think, 10 to 15% total in the country happen to be foreign faculty. But it all varies from institutions to institutions. Okay, so we also talk about, I should have put this in a quote, evaluate the essence of brain drain. That's also a phenomenon within internationalization. It's now called brain drain, brain circulation, and all that. Okay, I'm not fond of rankings. I'm sure many of you probably have seen my pieces. I'm very critical of rankings, but as Philip Altba states, they are here to stay. But the good thing is that there are so many of them. You can always pick and choose which one makes you comfortable, and then you just say, we are one of the according to. Sometimes if you're not sure, you're not in the famous ones. Which one's the famous ones? Arua, THE. I'm asking this crowd, right? I'm now teaching, right? So the QS, I'm not sure about the QS, etc. But the point here is we also have this rankings. The rankings, okay, I'll probably engage this through the course of the conversation, but these are some of the manifestations of internationalization, okay? All right, so what next? What is internationalization? So at the end, what we came to is there is no universally accepted definition. This is Hans de Wit, who actually took over from Altba, and now Altba actually simply said, this is widely misunderstood. So I came to a conclusion, I say in the book we published, that few other terms in higher education are as diverse and as rich. simply to say that this is all misunderstood. Now, just a little examples for you where South Africa stands in the whole scheme of things, and also where students actually go. Of course, I mean, undoubtedly, the US continues to be the major recipient, and followed by the UK, and then Australia, etc. Where do you find yourself? South Africa? I hope no one is a colorblind. Even for some of us, like myself, who is not, I have yet to figure between Sweden and South Africa. Like, I suspect it is this one, if not that one. But so you are actually, South Africa is actually somewhere within that range. Okay. If someone is super color sensitive, they will probably tell us which one is which. All right. Okay, in terms of where we are globally, I think this is a slide in 2012. This is pre-President Trump and other dynamics in Europe. So we have Germany. I don't think if this reflects Germany now, and I probably would just extend it further here for a number of reasons. And United States hovering here. South Africa shown a decline in 2012. All right. This is just to give you some ideas, but as you can see, Australia and other countries like UK, even Russian Federation, have indicated growth. I don't know why I don't see Australia here. Yes, of course. Yes, it's one of the largest. In fact, yeah. I'm not sure about this figure here. Anyway, but this is, I can't be responsible for the data. Okay. There are rationales for internationalization. Rationales at the national level, national at the institutional level, even national at the department level. So, typical rationale for internationalization would be nation building. Why do countries send, I've yet to figure this thing out. Nation building. I can tell you, for example, Ethiopia, for example, has agreed to send to my institution 50 doctoral students every year, which is fully paid by the Ethiopian government for 5 years. That's a big and a lot of commitment by way of sending students. The same with Eritrea until several years ago. So this internationalization at the national level, the purpose is a nation building, it's a capacity building. So for a number of reasons, it also has a political, social, and cultural dynamics. In the good old days, we used to have what is called Cold War, the Cold War era. Whether we are heading in that direction, I do not know. But in the good old days, you would have the East and the West. And then students travel to both blocks. And now with the changing dynamics, those countries, I'm sure you remember this Russia, which used to be in the East, now attracting more students for a number of reasons, which I don't want to go into. Income generation. At a country level, Australia, Britain, New Zealand, Canada, they are actually very sensitive around this internationalization dynamics in terms of student mobility and so forth. For example, even let me just give you some figures. I don't know if that figure is, I think for me it's kind of pretty low. In the US, student mobility is a $15.5 billion business, 15.5. At the global level, I rate this about 45 billion. That's about 5, 6, 7 years ago. So I'll probably put that number, given the number of students now traveling, which has grown from 2.5 to currently 5 to 4 million. I'll probably put that figure to 100 billion. We are anticipating student population to 8 million in 2020. That's about 2-3 years. Okay, that's at the national level. So, what are the benefits at the institutional level? It's not just about scholarship. It's about so many other things as well. It's a staff development. Its purpose would be quality enhancement. You want to raise your reputation, rankings, if you want to go in that category. Income generation. Some institutions, I know for a fact in the US, that they have to go elsewhere to generate resources beyond the borders of that country. The Gulf countries, I'm sure you know. University of New York has an Abu Dhabi, not even a branch, actually. University of New York, Abu Dhabi is the name. So it generates a lot of resources for institutions. So, and advancing research. In the good old days, we used to have academic exchange, student mobility and all that, largely on the basis of advancing research and knowledge production. Of course, scholarly publishing, strategic alliances, and collaboration. Right. So, the rationales vary from institution to institution. I'm sure your rationale is different from my institution for a number of reasons: historical, political, etc. From government department to government department. I can tell you, as a foreigner here, myself, that when the Department of Higher Education would treat me differently from the Home Affairs. Sometimes I find the two are not reading each other well, put it very kindly, and from stakeholder to stakeholder and from country to country. So first of all, the rationales vary. We have to agree on that. So the strategies that work in this institution may not necessarily work elsewhere. I think, I'm sure you know Mr. Teichler, a very famous internationalization expert in Germany. Okay? Now, I covered the historical, theoretical, etc. Now I just want to share some professional, realistic examples on the ground. So what do they call themselves? Let's start with the nomenclature. The nomenclature will tell you a lot. So, as you see, Harvard simply calls it International Office. Cambridge calls it Strategy Office. And I'll probably cover some of the why they call themselves what they call them later on. So they call it International Students and Scholars. You can actually tell here they are simply focusing on students and scholars. This one calls it International Education. Interesting. Berkeley calls it International Office. This is actually a nomenclature: Edinburgh, Makerere, Hague, etc. And Oslo calls it International Relations and Research Support. Peking University calls it International Relations. All right? I can go on the list. So the nomenclature varies. Why do they vary? Okay. Cambridge University, very interesting. The International Strategy Office, they call it the Strategy Office, works with the schools and faculties and departments, create, identify, and disseminate opportunities for international collaboration across all disciplines and countries. So you see their mandate is much bigger. It's create, identify, and disseminate opportunities. So they have to negotiate, structure, and implement international partnership agreements. Nico, you got to tell me how far I should be. The second one is Peking University. It's a very interesting one here because something similar to the earlier one, Cambridge, provides consultation to the leadership, supports international activities, plans and implements receptions of important foreign guests, etc., and even organizes, pretty cumbersome, organizes international conferences as well. What do we have with Edinburgh? I'll only focus on the mission is simply encourage internationalization, enhance student experience, etc. So they're simply focusing on students. What do we have here? I'll just skip some of this, but I just want to give you an impression. But I'm happy to share the slide. Oh, okay, good, so I don't have to rush. This is Brazil. Why Brazil is interesting in this country? What it's part of? Or the foreigners here. Okay, great. So they are intending to promote students, faculty and researchers exchange, and enhance cooperation, and also mobility. And these are the chances. What do we have in the US? So the establishment of arguments, help institutions establish successful international relations, etc., etc. Right. In terms of internationalization for South Africa, there are few drivers to that. Currently, the PhD population in South Africa as academics is only 40%. The country intends to actually double, nearly double that figure by 2025. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then there is huge interest in knowledge production because of the knowledge economy and all that. And then there is a great interest to massify the system. We'll see what happens now that we have free education. And then also enhance economic growth and global competitiveness. This country, I had a chance to look at the Department of Science and Technology, the NDP, and the development, the DHET documents. They all talk about knowledge production, economic growth, global competitiveness within the framework of equity. Okay, what do we have in terms of South Africa? Student population, I think you indicated that your student population is pretty low. This is what we have here. It's 7% overall in South Africa. But there's a lot of growth in the last 10 years. So overall, you have 50% of graduate students which are foreign. You call it international. It's very interesting. Whether you use the word international in this institution or foreign, I don't know. But what's fascinating to me is when you're coming from Europe, you are international. When you are coming from next door country, you are a foreigner. Well, the US even has a very interesting one. The US has what is called aliens. So we also have aliens. So this is kind of the terminology used, but I remember Mr. indicated that he was very particular. He said international. I listened to him. So, as you said, I think your figure is pretty much on the money. It's most, even for the entire South Africa, they came from the SADC countries. 60%. Your figure shows what? It's pretty larger than that one. 60% from non-SADC countries. You show 20%, if I recall, from overseas. So you're actually doing very well internationally. Right. Okay, these are some of the figures which I just want to throw at you. As I said, you can see the figures there. The largest, you have only 6%. I think you're not doing very badly in terms of undergraduates because it's only 6%. In 10 years, you don't see actually any difference. Very interesting. And postgraduate level is a very interesting one. You actually see a growth to 15%, even more now. The total, this is what it is. Okay. What do we have in terms of the South African staff profile? Over the years, you have grown from less than 10%. I'm sure that you say that you're mathematicians here, right? So you figured it out here. So it's more than, actually you can see the growth in here over the years in terms of foreign academics. Right, I will skip this slide. I'll skip this. Okay. And then I'll probably somehow come to statement I wrote. As I said, Olta and Ramli articulate that internationalization's global and local dimension do not represent categorical opposites, as I indicated earlier. They do, however, challenge practitioners, yourselves, many of you, researchers, and policymakers the world over to make sense of a complex panorama of opportunities and imperatives in a fluid, multifaceted, and potentially high-stakes environment. Then they go on to state what is called, or then is, quote, intelligent internationalization, which demands that those participating in the elaboration of internationalization activities and agendas have access to the information, ideas, and professional skill building opportunities that will enhance their ability to navigate the crucial nexus of internationalization at global and local levels. South Africa finds itself in the midst of intense decolonization dialogue, itself a subject of multiple understanding like internationalization. The question now remains how this so-called intelligent internationalization is deployed in order to promote local and national relevance along with enhancing international competence. The notion of sustainability of internationalization, the topic of this workshop today, lies in navigating this dynamics systematically and strategically. To be sure, this is as much a subject and interest of countries everywhere. I do maintain that Africa is the most internationalized in the world, not by participation, but by omission. I will repeat. Africa is the most internationalized in the world, not by participation, but by omission. To be sure, higher education is an international enterprise, and thus, it is not as much sustainability of internationalization as it is sustainability for internationalization. Sustainability as construed as advancement in all facets of internationalization consistent with the mission, vision, and objective of institutions and others. As I conclude, Africa faces internationalization not from a position of strength, but one enmeshed in weaknesses that emanate from the confluence of historical, economic, educational, financial, and paradigmatic contexts. The situation makes it more imperative and also more arduous and more complex to actively track the challenges, address the threats, and maximize the opportunities in internationalization of higher education in Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Damtu. I was trying to make notes, but I think your concluding statement is a very powerful statement, and I hope we can have access to it, to digest it. But I made a few notes, and I think I want to thank you heartily, for your overview, our global, and also sharing us, as we try to navigate ourselves within this global internationalization environment. I think there's a lot of opportunities, not just for us here in South Africa, but for us on the African continent. And I really appreciate how you placed us within the South African environment, so that we can see where we are. But I think also for our global partners here, it is, there are so many dynamics happening all over the world. Sometimes we make jokes of it. Sometimes it's maybe out of fear. But there are so many things happening globally that we are able to find ourselves and try to navigate this internationalization experience. So Damtu, thank you very much for your wisdom And I think we also have a few minutes for questions and comments. If you're welcome, the floor is open. I will try and direct it. I think there's probably a few more comments and questions, and we can take it over to lunch and tea time as well. But in our next section, we would like to have a bit more of a panel discussion, and then after that, it's going to be a lot more interactive. So don't fear, you will not sit like this for the whole day. But the next section is to look a little bit more at African scholarship. We've got 3 distinguished panelists, Prof. Sarah Howie, Prof. Yusuf Wahid, both from Stellenbosch University. Sarah is with us in the international office, and then we also have Prof. Johannes Wolden-Insar from the African Union. But I'm going to hand over to Hiba, who can be the program director from this point forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nico. Colleagues, good morning to those that I have not greeted personally. I hope you had a wonderful rest, and I'm glad that everybody's hair is back intact after the wind. And I see clearly that you brought jackets for today. So we trust that today will be a much nicer day and that you will be able to enjoy the wonderful Western Cape weather. So, Damtu, thank you very much for that input. I can also draw on your 2008 book, but I won't go there. I would like to call to the front our 3 panelists, Sarah, Johannes, Yusuf, if you could please come to the front, and then Professor Farima Larba, our chair for the panel, if you can join us, that would be lovely. The position that Stellenbosch takes around African scholarship. We throw around the term and we go around the continent and around the world to say that Stellenbosch is committed to continental development. We are committed to play a role in the capacity building and higher education of Stellenbosch in producing more PhD graduates. But what does that really mean? What is the philosophy behind African scholarship, and how does that take effect at Stellenbosch University? So I've asked 3 panelists, 3 very distinguished panelists, I will not introduce them, to share their views and to engage with you. So really for you to also ask questions and to put your opinions forward so that we may also learn from that, to share their views on African scholarship. And to chair the panel, I've asked Professor Magda Farima-Larbe, former Vice Rector for Teaching and Learning at Stellenbosch, and I think now back in a space where she feels extremely comfortable as a phenomenal researcher in higher education. And I say that with great authority because she was my own study leader and guided me through unraveling what does the internationalization of higher education mean. So, Professor Farima-Larbe, thank you very much for making yourself available this morning to chair this panel, and I hand over to you.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much, Yuba, for that introduction, and also thank you for asking me to moderate the panel. I'm really looking forward to the interaction with our 3 panelists, and then of course with you, the greater audience that we have here. It's wonderful to see such a diverse group of people coming together, and we hope in the next hour we can share some thoughts on African scholarship, which is the topic of our panel discussion. Now, just by way of introduction, I think we would all agree that since the inception of the very first universities, which actually consisted of a collection of scholars and students coming together, scholarship has been a defining characteristic of higher education. Lewis Elton, one of the very well-known higher educationists from the UK, maintains that scholarship does not have a well-defined meaning, but it is crucially important as a concept, a belief, and a practice. And I think it's interesting that he distinguishes between scholarship as a concept, scholarship as a belief, and scholarship as a practice. Now, I think scholarship has for a very long time been seen as a feature of the research that we do. But then Ernest Boyer came along and he broadened this notion of scholarship, where he then talked about the scholarship of integration, which is the integration and utilization of knowledge across disciplines, the scholarship of application, where we can use our research knowledge to address social problems, and then the scholarship of teaching, to apply scholarly rigor to our teaching. So I think the concept, the notion of scholarship is one that is still open for discussion, and but still very central to what we do in universities. So today then, let us broaden this notion a bit further by talking about African scholarship, and I think various questions come to mind. What is African scholarship? Does African scholarship differ from other forms of scholarship? And if so, how? What does it take to engage in African scholarship? I think those are some of the questions that hopefully we will engage with in the next hour. Now, you've already been introduced to our three specialists on the panel. I'm going to introduce them one by one as they make their input. Each of them has 15 minutes for an input, and then hopefully we will have about 15 to 20 minutes at the end of the session for questions and answers and interaction with you as the audience. So our first panelist is Professor Yusuf Wahid. He is the former Dean of the Faculty of Education at Stellenbosch University. He's a distinguished professor in the Faculty of Education. His main work is done in the area of philosophy of education, and he is really a prolific author. I'm always amazed, and I don't know, this man never sleeps, I think, because he just produces one book after the other. Some of the books that you might find interesting is Teaching and Learning as a Pedagogic Pilgrimage, Cultivating Faith, Hope and Wonder. Another one, Rupturing African Philosophy of Teaching and Learning. He's also done quite a lot of work on ethical teaching and learning and Muslim education. He's also the editor-in-chief of the South African Journal of Higher Education and principal editor of Citizenship, Teaching and Learning. Now, what sets Yusuf apart, I think, in Stellenbosch University is that he was the very first creator, contributed to Stellenbosch University's very first MOOC. And that MOOC was on African scholarship and African philosophy of education. So we are looking forward then, Yusuf, to your inputs on African scholarship. Thank you very much.
I can stand 15 minutes. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I didn't want to talk about the massive open online course because we had a huge success with it, the institution, not only in terms of numbers but more in terms of epistemology, the point of view of knowledge. And there's something that I want to touch on in relation to my recent work. When the renowned, world-renowned Freirean scholar Carlos Alberto Torres asked us to make a contribution on the work of Paulo Freire in Africa, I thought that was quite a challenging and demanding task. And what we did was to look at when Freire or Freirean education arrived on the continent of Africa, and then what did Africans actually learn and did not want to learn from Freire. So what I want to share with you are some of the ideas around Freirean education and how African scholarship responded to Freire. We all know that Freire was incarcerated in his home country, Brazil, for 16 years. And we all know he was excommunicated, and he received a scholarship in Harvard for 1 year, and then he worked as a consultant, education consultant for the World Council on Churches, and that's where he made contact with Africa. Because as a consultant to countries on the African continent, in particular Guinea-Bissau and Tanzania, Freire introduced a particular program of literacy which revolves around, my understanding, 3 pertinent concepts. The one was conscientization, the second one was dialogical praxis, and the third one was humanization. So what I will do is to briefly touch on those 3 concepts and actually make a case from recent research how Africa has responded to Freirean epistemology. And then I will also mention what we have done with the massive open online course and how more than 6,000 students were registered for the course over 2 years, and I think there's going to be another opportunity for students all over the world to register this year. Then I will briefly say how some of the students just responded to that MOOC, which in many ways has become, in my mind, a neo-Freirean initiative. So I talk here as a neo-Freirean scholar today. When Freire spoke about conscientization, he was concerned about the individual's autonomy, the individual's obsession to speak their mind, what it means for an individual to assume voice, to come to speech, to stake her claims without fear of the opposition, or without fear of being incarcerated, or without fear of being banned. And for Freire, that was the primary objective of what it means to be educated. And for Africans, that was important, because knowing our history, colonization, post-colonization, apartheid, we were, in a way, coerced not to speak our minds. And it is in that sense that many Africans, because of their history, many Africans and their work became attuned to Freirean epistemology. Not always in the way Freire envisaged, but more in the principled understanding of what it means to come to speech. So when one thinks of African scholarship today, there's a paradox. If I think about doctoral studies in particular, the paradox is that doctoral students, although they speak their minds, they do it reluctantly and at times hesitantly. It's as if the arguments are not lucid or clear enough or persuasive enough, and somebody else must serve as a crutch for that particular kind of work. So in a way, that's the paradox. In a way, I do not want to be disingenuous to say that Africans have not come to speech in the conscientized way Freire envisaged. But in their coming to speech, they have become very hesitant to be bolder and expressive in the articulation of voice. So that seems to be the paradox. Even in my own supervision of doctoral students from the African continent, I've always noticed they are reticent and hesitant to speak their minds. But they can speak their minds. So that's the paradox. And in a way, if Freire were to ask how African scholarship has internalized the idea of conscientization, Freire would be quite disappointed. Because for Freire it was not a matter of resisting opposition. It was about autonomous articulation of speech, even at the expense of hurting yourself or becoming a subject to harm. And that's, to me, the first observation. The second one is about dialogical praxis. And as you can infer from the name which Freire introduced, because much of Freire's readings connected to the early Frankfurt Schule, to the kinds of thoughts espoused by Max Horkheimer, Theodor Adorno, and Jürgen Habermas. And when Freire became associated, not in a way intellectually associated with the critical theoretical school in Germany, in Frankfurt, Freire in many ways saw his work as one of inviting people, the word is summoning people to conversations, to engage them in dialogue. And as you know, the phenomenal book, which is the most read book that Freire produced in his lifetime, the 1970 publication Pedagogy of the Oppressed. If one does not want to claim that that is the most read education book ever in the last 75 years, it's cited 90 million times almost. So it gives you an idea of the phenomenal contribution Pedagogy of the Oppressed has made. But it was in Pedagogy of the Oppressed that Freire espoused the idea of dialogical praxis. So you ask me, how does African scholarship resonate with dialogical praxis? And what dialogical praxis means, in a neo-Freirean way, I re-articulated, is how do African scholars embrace the idea of engaging deliberatively through listening, articulation, and talking back. And that's the Freirean notion of dialogical praxis. It does seem from African scholarship that there's an overwhelming support for articulation, and people do listen. But there's a reluctance to talk back. There's a reluctance to challenge the most established. And Freire would have been, in my analysis, Freire would have been disappointed with it. So I'm not saying that African scholarship is uncritical. I do not want to go there. But what I want to say is that there is a seeming reluctance on the part of African scholarship to be really embracing the notion of talking back. So if you ask me, how has African scholarship embraced the idea of dialogical praxis, I would say partially, but not overwhelmingly. Because Freirean scholarship is about speaking your mind, giving the other point, and not just internalizing what you have been exposed to. My last point. What made Freire famous, and this is what came to resonate with Africans, was his humanization project. And I'm aware today that we are in the era of post-humanization. That, I mean, think about Rosie Braidotti and Karen Barad's work on post-humanism, and how they convincingly argue that aspirations cannot just be in relation to humans, but also in relation to what it means to be non-human. And I was trying to find in most of Freire's writings whether he was actually a humanist or a post-humanist. I'm still persuaded he's a humanist. But unlike many of the commentators of Freire, I'm not persuaded that he was overwhelmingly a critical theorist. I think in many ways, in Freire's work, he flirts with post-structuralism. For Freire, it was not only about the known, but also about the unexpected, but also about the surprise. It was also about wonder. So many who argue that Freire is a critical theorist should actually revisit his work again, and they will locate traces of his post-structuralism in his work. But that's not the argument. The argument is, how does African scholarship respond to Freire's humanist ideas? Overwhelmingly. This is where one area of scholarship where Africans or African scholarship should not be faulted. Fundamentally because knowledge, education, and ideas are about what it means to cultivate humanity, what it means to live in harmony, yet with dissent, what it means to live with acceptance, but yet with a sense of what I would call rhythmic tolerance. There are moments of acceptance, and there are moments of moving away. So, like a rhythm, rhythmic tolerance is not overwhelming tolerance where I just tolerate people for the sake of letting the conversation unfold. I sense a sense of rhythmic tolerance. There's a belligerence, but there's also a patience and an overwhelming wanting to engage with the other. So the question is, how does African scholarship resonate with Freire's idea of humanization? As I said, overwhelmingly. In most of the writings, in most of the doctoral contributions that I certainly have encountered, I have always seen students wanting to improve their situations and move towards a more plausible and defensible state of affairs. It wasn't as if scholarship was just about invoking the critical, but it was about the cultivation of a better humanity, of a better society. And now I want to make a comment about the MOOC. Many of the students ask on the MOOC platform, which I have to mention this because it's not Stellenbosch University's MOOC, by the way, it's Future Learn's MOOC. Future Learn is a company attached to the Open University in the UK, and Stellenbosch University is a partner. What many of the students ask when they engage with one another on that particular MOOC platform was in fact how higher education, more specifically university education, can help them to become better human beings. And this is the ironical response. In a Freirean way, I would argue, for them, and this you can pick up in many of the conversations, because a MOOC is only about conversations. You don't just provide information to students. They construct and reconstruct and deconstruct their own meanings. And this is the fascinating part of the MOOC. But in many of the discussion forums, the contributors would argue that cultivating a humanity, and I link it to Freire, is not just about respecting one another, but it's about recognizing the need for dissent, recognizing the need to be different. And once you recognize the need to be different and recognize difference, then there's always the possibility that humanity will flourish, if I invoke Aristotle again. So, in conclusion, what I want to say about African scholarship, it is slightly biased towards a lack of autonomy, and that's not being disingenuous. It is slightly adialogical. That means it is not entirely dialogical, but it is also not dialogical. but it is overwhelmingly humanist, because Africans want to see a better society, a better form of living in association with one another, a better form of living together. And that is what I discovered in African scholarship. And if one has to ask me who the theorists are, and many people refer to Freire in an unwitting way, who the theorists are, my assertion would be Paulo Freire shaped most of the educational agendas of scholarship on the African continent. And that, to me, has a lot to do with his influence in the 1950s, in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, and especially in the 90s in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yusuf, for those very provocative thoughts and a lot of matter that we can think about and maybe discuss a bit later. Our second panelist is Professor Sarah Howie, currently the director of the African Center for Scholarship, a very new center established in Stellenbosch University International recently. Now, as all the panelists, Sarah also has a very long curriculum vitae. I'm just taking out some highlights. She's a former professor in education and director of the Center for Evaluation and Assessment at the University of Pretoria. She established the center there, and I think she's very, very well known nationally and internationally for the work that she's done on educational assessment and evaluation. She also worked at the Human Sciences Research Council and the former, the predecessor of the National Research Foundation. She does a lot of international work for UNESCO, NAFIC, the World Bank, OECD, as a consultant, and she serves in various committees. She's also currently the deputy chairperson of the board of the South African Qualifications Authority, SAQA. She also serves on the Umalusi Assessment and Standards Committee, and the Universities of South Africa Admissions and Selective Committee, and she's a member of the Academy of Science for South Africa, amongst others. So somebody who is very well positioned for a new position as director of the African Center for Scholarship, and I think we're very keen to hear her thinking about African scholarship. So Sarah, it's over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that, those kind words and introduction. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I was very privileged to be invited to join this very prestigious panel, I have to say. As a pragmatist, I have to put it out there, starting off, I'm totally inspired now to go and read more after Professor Wahid's really passionate, I think, presentation. And I certainly have a very soft spot for Brazil, in addition to my soft spot for Africa, because I lived in Brazil. So it's very nice to hear the two joined in a philosophical way in terms of how it's also shaped the African experiences. I want to come at it a little bit differently, in fact, in terms of presenting some ideas and thoughts in terms of not only what the challenges and problems are in terms of scholarship and its development in certainly South Africa, and I'd speak to some that is also on the African continent, but also in terms of how Stellenbosch is trying to look at it and trying to develop strategies in terms of nurturing, developing, growing that scholarship as well. So I arrived at Stellenbosch last year, and I suddenly was the most popular person until people realized that it was scholarship and not scholarships. So I lost my popularity quite quickly after that. But just to reiterate, I think some of the issues both Professor Fareed Malherbe mentioned in terms of the inclusive description of scholarship, pertaining to not only research, which I think is a more traditional notion, but expanding that to teaching and practice. And some of the qualities I think that Professor Wahid mentioned, daring to be different. What is a scholar? What are the key attributes of a scholar? daring to be different, courage of convictions, being reflective, inquisitive, having integrity, which is absolutely at the heart of scholarship. And I think is now a part of the experience and tensions that scholars around, certainly South Africa, perhaps the continent and internationally, the tensions of dealing with the competitiveness, the introduction of various systems that challenge indeed and lead to behavior that is perhaps not ethical, that tests the integrity of individuals in certainly the research environments that I've worked in. And these are challenges, so I keep putting those qualities up to remind myself of what we're aiming at. And when we talk about nurturing and growing scholars, what are we trying to do? Who are the kind of people that we are aiming to develop? So I just put it up there for that. Also to remind ourselves about the African scholarship journey, which has already been touched upon in both the previous two presentations. But again, just to reflect on the fact that the internationalization of education, particularly in scholarship, it's not new. It's an ancient form and goes right back in Africa to the Museum of Alexandria and the library, where scholars from all over the world, at that stage, the ancient world, came together. So just to keep reminding ourselves, in fact, this is not a new phenomenon. But in terms of what we've experienced in the 1900s and now going into 2000s, the issues that people call challenges, in fact, I call them problems because some of them really are problems, and for every problem I know there is a solution. Whether we like the solution or not, there is a solution. And they pertain to some of the issues raised already. Lack of funds was already mentioned. The diaspora, certainly post-independence, deterioration of infrastructure, poor conditions for research and teaching, the erosion of academic freedom has just been touched on yet again. And that's been a key in terms of developing the voice of scholars on the continent. Also, I have to say the predatory activities of donors. This is something that's not always politically correct to state, but it's very important for us when we have a look at the variety of activities over the last 40, 50 years. There have definitely been different agendas, and so part of what Africa has to do is reclaim our right to dictate the agendas that we wish to follow on the continent or within our country. And these discussions are aimed at taking back the ownership of the voices that were being spoken about. It's our voice. How do we develop those voices, and how do we set our own agendas? And I think that, for me, is really important in terms of our own experiences. More lately, I think in the internationalization era that we are currently in, the issues around publish or perish, the predatory journals, the competition to get into non-African journals, again, lack of funds, dependency on donor aid for some universities is critical. And one can again see that in terms of the scholarly journey, that may have, in terms of the benefits and growth, that may be a stumbling block in some cases. But then we also have the increased mobility. Not all of this is doom and gloom, because in terms of the flight to the West, the opportunities that have arisen from that diaspora, if one likes, for the Africans, is that we have now millions of people around the world from which we draw as a resource. So we can see them as resources and voices and external voices and critical friends in many cases to draw upon. If we look at the South African, the latest dealings that we're managing currently, that we as an environment have to respond to, the massification of education, of higher education, but also primary and secondary education, where we saw secondary education going tenfold in the last 30 years. It's incredible to look at those numbers. The pressures that are being put on public universities in South Africa to absorb the vast growth of students who aspire but are not yet enabled to get into universities. The lack of other alternatives that they have. These are all putting pressures on the system and causing the kind of behavior that we also see that happened in the post-independence phase in other African countries. That violence, the flight, the issues around infrastructure. These are things that we've experienced once again in the last 10 years. And the issues around transformation. This is a whole part of what a set of issues that have confronted institutions that we now have to manage. I have to also point out that this takes place in the context where we still have worldwide 758 million adults who lack any literacy skills, coming back to the point that was made. 2/3 of those are women. So we have yet another agenda that needs to be pursued. So I refer to the diaspora, and how do we see this also both as a problem on the one hand, referring to the brain drain that was mentioned in the first presentation, but also the opportunity. So for South Africa, we may see this as partly as an opportunity, because 66% of that 25 million that is spread out and left their own home countries remain within sub-Saharan Africa. And generally South Africa benefits, in many cases, from some of the brightest talent that leaves other countries. So there's a diffusion of knowledge that is taking place. But what we're realizing is that the human interaction, that face-to-face, in terms of having those knowledgeable people within our environment, is also critical. So this can be seen as a positive, also being a concern, of course, depending on where you are. But the impact that it has in terms of us as an institution, but also many institutions, is the fact that you're now dealing with both staff, but also particularly students that are coming to these institutions from many different places, many different journeys. They've got different knowledge bases. They're coming with different philosophies. This increases the richness, on the one hand, of our interaction, but it may provide various institutions with a challenge. We don't know where they are. We don't know where they're coming from. And so in terms of the teaching side, one has to take that into account. And in many cases, with a constructivist approach, one can deal with that. But in many cases, other scholars may not acknowledge those different journeys. So we need to try to do that. I won't say very much about the scholarship indicators. Being in evaluation and assessment for over 20 years, I have my own skeptical views on some of them, but nonetheless, they do summarize and highlight some aspects of where institutions are. And Stellenbosch, in particular, has had the highest weighted research output, whatever that means in terms of the details. But it says something about publications, it says something about degrees awarded, and that's the starting point for what we're managing here. The enrollment, I just wanted to give you a sense, has actually grown by 5% in the last 5 years. And whilst one may see that as a positive, and it is a positive in terms of the massification element and increasing access, there's a cap to that in terms of the physical capacity that ultimately such an institution currently can have physically. And so one has to look at alternative strategies. It has implications for all sorts of organizational strategies and structures. 33% of the students are postgrads. So that in itself lends us the opportunity. Hence, we're starting to work towards why we have a center, an Africa Center for Scholarship. One thing we have to look at is the trajectory for doctoral candidates. And just looking at the simple master's movement to doctoral candidates that we have just in this university, and I'm not yet talking about the continent, we see that there's the conversion from the master's to doctoral. There's still an opportunity in terms of there being so many more master's students compared to the number of doctoral students. It's not appropriate necessarily for every master's candidate to become a doctoral candidate, as we're all aware. But nonetheless, there is a vast pool of available students who would be candidates to do this. Just to give you a sense, and this might have come up before, but the African interaction has grown tremendously. I was a student here 30 years ago, and I hesitate to say, but 30 years ago there was no talk about internationalization, hence we are celebrating the Jubilee. But just to look at then and now, and in terms of also the interactions on the continent, it's absolutely massive the way it has grown. So this collaboration, again, offers a huge opportunity for the kind of partnerships that we think are needed in order to deal with the issues around scholarship and African scholarship in particular. So I come quickly to the Africa Center for Scholarship, which is newly established. There are a variety of different aspects that we're looking at, but essentially the idea is to promote, develop, support and enhance Stellenbosch University scholarship across Africa. As Robert keeps reminding us, we're rooted in Africa but global in reach, and that's exactly the sentiment that we're looking at. But it's primarily to look at supporting the other faculties, departments, centres, activities into the trajectory of scholarship across the universities. And also looking at coordinating within the international unit itself. We're essentially in a support structure. So how do we keep our staff up to date and informed about what these debates are that are going on out beyond the support structure? Why focus on Africa? Well, some of the numbers for those that live beyond Africa, I don't want to call you aliens, foreigners or anything else, I'm being very careful here, those that live beyond the realm of the continent. These are some of the reasons why we really, really need to grow our scholarship. If you look at just look at the numbers, and I suppose I come from a numbers person, but if we look at the numbers in terms of 0.7% of scientific research of the world comes from the African continent, one can see the distorted nature of African scholarship. We're not sharing, we're not getting it out. 1.1% of the publications, the patents. So the numbers in themselves tell the story about why it's so important for us not to delay any further in terms of this development. I don't have time to talk too much more, but I do want to raise the issue of the academy, which is one of the areas that has been going for some time before I started the centre, and is we're looking at in terms of this directly tries to deal with some of the issues that have been raised in terms of scholarship. So in terms of the African Doctoral Academy, just to highlight a number of points, what the Academy tries to do is one area of scholarship which we think has been underdeveloped, not only in South Africa but beyond, has been the area of the research design and methodology in particular. And of course there are a number of other skills that we know as scholars are needed in terms of softer, some of them are softer skills, but some have come across in terms of where we are now, and that's around writing and publishing. But also what we've experienced in terms of the loss of skilled people is around the issue of supervision. Suddenly, we've got many more students to supervise. And at my worst time a few years ago, I had 28 masters and PhDs to supervise. And so, if you look at those kinds of numbers, the need is there, the people are coming, but we need also the skilled supervisors to manage that. So we also incorporate that together with colleagues within the university in terms of offerings that we do. So just again a few numbers, but just to say that at this stage we've reached about nearly 4,000 people over the period of time that it's been going. Just to give you an idea of who are the people that are coming, because it gives you a sense of where the needs are in terms of scholarship. We get twice as many applicants as those that in the end come. And the problem that they have is there are no funds. That's it. We could double our numbers tomorrow if we had the funds, if they had the funds to come. And so what happens is we only have 1/3 of people coming from outside South Africa. And that 1/3, most of them would come from Southern Africa, SADC countries, and East Africa. So relatively close, so costs are a little bit less than they would be if they were coming up from the north or sometimes west due to flight connections. If we look at the age, this is the most interesting for me because we have so many mature students. We're not talking about early or very young postgraduates. We're talking about people who sometimes are quite well established but have never had the opportunity perhaps to undertake the kind of skills training. In many cases we're doing skills training in terms of research design and methodology. So that for me is really interesting, that we've got this, it's not only the next generation in terms of youth, we're trying to make up for quite a few decades where this development didn't take place. And we do have more ladies than gentlemen. What's also interesting is that they come from beyond just simply the education. We're not only servicing higher education, we are servicing beyond, And there are very, very few full-time students that actually come. Only 2% are full-time students, which is something else that tells me is also part of the story. Here comes the other challenge that we've discovered, is that most of our presenters are South African presenters. We do have presenters from our bilateral partners, and we're very, very grateful for that input. But we're also realizing that the need is to diversify our presenters, and we need to draw more from the continent as well. And there's where some of the challenges have come, to get funding to identify, I think, the talent that exists on the continent, and to mobilize the funding to get them to come is also another challenge that we have. But that's on the agenda, and it's a key part of recognizing, elevating the status of our scholars on the African continent. You can see the growth over the last, in particular over the last few months. We've really expanded in terms of the offerings and needs. As we've done a needs analysis, we found that the variety and the need and growth has gone simultaneously in the last 8 months. It's been incredible to see what else people need. And if you start to ask growing scholars, whatever the age is, what do you need, you start to find the things that you would naturally overlook. Basic introductory courses that you would have thought would have been handled earlier in their university lives, but apparently have not. So hence we will continue to expand. One other important point, I think, in terms of looking to Africa, is the fact that we also have been running and will run more joint schools. And so far we've worked in Makerere, in Namibia, and in Ghana, and in Malawi, in terms of those joint schools. But already the requests have started to come in since I've joined the university. Please come to our country, please come and work with us. And I stress the joint nature of the partnership. It has to be the two parties coming together to share that knowledge. But there is a great need for an expansion of those activities, so we'll be looking at that. So finally, you've already had the advertisement, so I'm not going to be crass and abuse my position, but there is a flyer. And perhaps just to come to the final thoughts round off, that it is a challenging context for scholarship currently, and we do tend to sometimes dwell on the negatives, but after the passionate presentation of Professor Wahid, I'm energized to go and look further. I do think that the partnerships, and I think we've been celebrating partnerships this week, those partnerships make a difference. And those partnerships are the essence of supporting the development of scholarship and excellence in Africa. Also the fact, and I've been impressed when I came to Stellenbosch, having been exposed to 5 other universities, either in my studies or my work, I've been really impressed about the support environment here. And I really wish, in many cases, that it can be further strengthened, expanded, but also that other institutions have similar opportunities. Because it's really the strong support environment that makes the difference in creating that conducive environment for scholars to operate. There's nothing more frustrating for a professor working on a research proposal and then not having the follow-up support that you want to have in terms of turning it around or having access to various equipment and support. So I really do believe that that support environment does make the difference in terms of the thriving and the further development. And therefore we not only have to focus on the scholars, but we also have to focus on those developmental environments within institutions and strengthen them and offer further opportunities for growth in the support environments. Whether it's research management, whether it's financial management, those are the things that make a big difference in the end of the day. Often you may not see them unless you are interacting, as I did many times with my 75 odd projects. But that's what does make the difference. And finally, I think to look towards our new generation of scholars. Whilst we're focusing on new growth, we mustn't forget that there are some scholars who are still struggling midstream, who've not had the opportunity, and to try and pick them up along the way as we're growing new timber, so to speak. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I think following on some of the challenges that Yusuf highlighted around African scholars not speaking back, you latched onto that and you focused on some more problems, but what is important is also presenting some solutions. And one of that is the contribution that the African Doctoral Academy makes. So thank you so much for your inputs. We're looking forward to see, maybe in 5 or 10 years' time, what the Africa Center for Scholarship has done and how it has contributed to the development of African scholarship. Our last panelist is Johannes. I'm under strict instructions from him just to call him Johannes. He's a senior education expert at the African Union Commission and in charge of coordinating a number of higher education initiatives of the African Union, the Nyerere Scholarship Program, Intra-Africa Academic Mobility Scheme, harmonization of higher education programs, the African Quality Rating Mechanism, and the Pan-African Quality Assurance and Accreditation Framework. He was a consultant for the Association of African Universities, and he has also served as a senior quality assurance expert in the Ethiopian Higher Education Relevance and Quality Agency. So Johannes comes from a very wide background in African higher education, and we are really looking forward to hearing your thinking about African scholarship. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here. But maybe let me confess that I totally misunderstood the word scholarship with the scholarship rosary that it is, and sometimes it is also good as this misunderstanding will help you to see the African initiatives towards scholarship in bursary. When Professor Yusuf says about when I see his presentation, then I thought the scholarship meant to be more with the scholarity, education, all this philosophy behind it. But when I see also from Professor Sarah first presentation what is scholarship and scholarship, then I say I have that intention is scholarship. So with that engagement, my presentation will be about the bursary, but it's also not totally detached. But one thing is also to promote access to scholars, so that in that perspective, I want to share also this experience. But in other words, we can discuss. But I want also to provide scholarship with bursaries, and in that we in the African Union we have 3 initiatives which we want to support with scholarship: the Nyerere Scholarship Program, Intra-Africa Academic Mobility, or the expanded Nyerere scheme, and the Pan-African University. In the Nyerere program is more a symbolic nature, which was launched in 2007, and of course, when I say here with bursary scholarship, there are so many scholarships at bilateral levels, and so which I want to see here is on the multilateral level, which is coordinated at African Union as symbolic to create more pan-Africanism, harmonization, and recognition of qualifications to promote that. And in 23-24, we make that especially for female candidates to encourage, and in 2015-2016 with scholarship for physical disabilities, in 27 for education science, and in the 28 calls this year, which is in April, end of April, for female applicants in science, technology, education, and mathematics STEM. 166 students from 34 countries is simply a symbolic nature. And in intra-SCP, Intra-Africa Academic Mobility Scheme, it was launched in 2010. The mobility is managed with the European Commission in collaboration with the African Union. The scheme grants a scholarship for partial, short-term, and full study master's and PhD programs. And in this one, we have so far 1,255 individuals with 782 masters, 340 doctoral, and 187 staff. And what is in all the character of this scholarship, the beneficiaries must be citizens of the African member states. The universities which they go should be recognized African universities, and the intention is more to promote intra-Africa collaboration in academic integration to this, and there are 29 university partnerships involving 97 African higher educations from 38 partnerships. The purpose which I come also this was to make monitoring visit to Stellenbosch University, because the Stellenbosch University is also among the university partnership which implement this. And when we go in that one, so behind the scholarity philosophy, we are more engaged about the problem of the students, whether the stipends are enough for them, whether they have research grant, and so. That's why we will see also from the practicality in this, not the scholarships. Maybe just also to see a Pan-African University, which is one flagship program in the African Union to promote also research, education, postgraduate education in Africa. And it is being coordinating in the different regions and with a central rectorate. And the students again here will come from all over Africa and in different thematic areas. So in this also to promote at the multilateral level to engage scholarship, recognition of programs, and so. And beyond the bursary, our intention is to contribute to Pan-Africanism, to continental development program. And also these are starting, we want to scale up, and eventually they will have impact also in academic integration in Africa. Just to give you an idea, that is in 5 thematic areas, as I say, in the different regions: basic science, technology, and innovation. It is coordinating in the East Africa Hub in Kenya, in Jomo Kenyatta University. The Life and Earth Science is in West Africa, Nigeria, Ibadan University. But also it is in different groups. The students come from all over Africa. The governance, humanity, and social science in Central Africa to Cameroon and Yaoundé too, and water, energy sciences, and climate change in North Africa, in Algeria, Telemeson University. And all these 4 universities are operational, even students have been graduated. And in the 5th thematic area in space sciences in South Africa, still it's not, students are not operational, but it has been now in South Africa, and Cape Peninsula University with other universities will coordinate to share the space science. in the next academic year it will be the students will be admitted, and it's filled hope, but